A nun in red breaks every rule. But why? Welcome to Midnight Radio Drama. I am your host, Wilfred. Tell me where you're joining from. Your comments keep this mystery alive. I'm excited to read everyone. Let's begin. In the sleepy market town of Flaxborough, Tuesday mornings were a study in gentle predictability. Shopkeepers arranged their wares with meticulous care. The postman's footsteps echoed softly on cobblestones, and the townsfolk gathered in muted clusters to exchange the usual blend of weather complaints and local news. That particular morning, the modest town hall was host to its fortnightly council meeting, a ritual observed with dutiful politeness by the assembled dignitaries and the occasional curious observer. Inside the chamber, the mayor adjusted his spectacles and tapped his gavel lightly. "Order, please. Let us proceed with the agenda." The discussion progressed through motions about road repairs and the annual flower show, the atmosphere unremarkably civil. Then, as if roused from a polite doze, a commotion rippled from the rear entrance. A woman, dressed not in the expected subdued hues of Flaxborough's usual visitors, but in a striking red habit, stood framed in the doorway. The vivid colour drew all eyes, a deliberate statement amid the town's muted palette. She was a nun, or so she claimed, though her attire was decidedly unorthodox. Whispers stirred immediately. Mrs. Cranfield, the postmistress, muttered to her neighbour, "I don't recall any convent wearing red." Mr. Penfold, the solicitor, raised a sceptical eyebrow. "Quite irregular indeed." The woman's voice was calm but firm. "I am Sister Helena of the Order of St. Agnes. I have come to speak with the council regarding a matter of some urgency concerning the Abbey grounds." Inspector Purbright, seated quietly near the back with a notebook unobtrusively placed on his lap, observed the unfolding scene with mild interest. His reputation for gentle tact and unhurried deduction had earned him the trust of many, though he preferred to listen first. As the council chairman invited Sister Helena to speak, a murmur of speculation buzzed just beneath the surface. What urgency could a nun in red bring to Flaxborough's sleepy governance? And why had she arrived so unexpectedly? The answer lay, as Purbright suspected, not in grand gestures, but in the subtle undercurrents, the quiet shift of glances, the half-formed phrases exchanged in corridors, and the secrets best kept beneath layers of civility. And as Sister Helena began to reveal her story, a peculiar and understated crime quietly unfolded, threatening to disrupt the town's delicate order in ways none could yet foresee. The council chamber's murmurs settled as Sister Helena took her seat near the mayor's table, her red habit a vivid contrast to the muted browns and greys of the room. Inspector Purbright sat quietly at the back, his keen eyes attentive, his manner unassuming, but thoroughly engaged. The unexpected visitor had injected a note of intrigue into an otherwise routine morning, and Purbright, accustomed to the town's small dramas, recognized the delicate tremors beneath the surface. Sister Helena cleared her throat softly before addressing the assembly. "Thank you for allowing me to speak. The matter concerns an artifact discovered recently during restoration work on the Abbey grounds." She paused, noting the polite skepticism. "It is a reliquary, a small, intricately wrought box that was found buried beneath the eastern cloister." The mayor adjusted his spectacles, eyebrows raised. "And this reliquary, Sister Helena, what significance does it hold?" "According to our records," she replied, "it is said to contain a relic of St. Agnes herself, lost to history for centuries. Such an object, if authenticated, would hold considerable religious and cultural value, not just to our order, but to the community." A ripple of interest passed through the council members. The solicitor, Mr. Penfold, leaned forward. "Has the reliquary been examined?" Sister Helena nodded. Preliminary examination by our archivist suggests it is genuine, though thorough analysis is ongoing. However, more pressing is the fact that the reliquary has vanished. A collective intake of breath filled the chamber. The mayor's calm facade briefly faltered. Vanished? How so? It disappeared from the secured display case where it was kept, Sister Helena explained. No signs of forced entry, and the security system registered no alarms. It is as though it was never there. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the loss sinking in. Purbright noted the subtle tightening of shoulders, the fleeting glances exchanged. The mayor cleared his throat. Inspector Purbright, given your role, I trust you will take this matter in hand. Purbright inclined his head. I shall, Mr. Mayor. May I first speak with Sister Helena in private? Later, in the modest confines of the town hall's side office, Purbright and Sister Helena spoke quietly. She was measured, thoughtful, but there was an undercurrent of urgency in her tone that belied the composed exterior. The Abbey has been a cornerstone of Flaxborough for centuries, she said. The reliquary's significance extends beyond mere artifact. It is a symbol of faith and continuity. Do you suspect anyone within the Abbey or town might have motive to take it? Purbright inquired. She hesitated. There have been tensions. Some within the clergy question the order's stewardship. Others see the artifact as leverage in broader disputes. Purbright nodded, considering the social dynamics of the Abbey and town alike. I'll begin by speaking with those who had access to the reliquary. Over the following days, Purbright's inquiries led him through a network of conversations rich with subtle nuances. The Abbey's head sacristan, Mr. Hollis, was a meticulous man whose pride in his duties was apparent, but whose nervous glances hinted at something unspoken. The Abbey's archivist, Miss Clark, was scholarly and precise, yet notably guarded when questioned about recent visitors. Outside the Abbey walls, the townsfolk offered their own speculations, each tinted with personal bias. Mrs. Cranfield, the postmistress, suggested a shadowy outsider's hand. Mr. Penfold mused on possible insurance fraud, while Miss Everett, the librarian, quietly noted the town's growing impatience with the Abbey's secretiveness. The investigation was as much about navigating human temperament as unraveling factual threads. Purbright observed that the disappearance had unsettled more than just the Abbey. It had punctured the placid facade of Flaxborough's orderly life, exposing old resentments and petty rivalries. A particularly telling moment came when Purbright encountered Jonathan Wilkes, a local historian whose fascination with the Abbey's past was matched only by his thinly veiled disdain for the Church's authority. Over tea in Wilkes's book-lined study, the two men engaged in a polite but pointed exchange. I find it curious, Wilkes remarked, that such an object could vanish without trace in a place reputed for its vigilance. It speaks to either extraordinary cunning or complacency. Purbright smiled faintly, or perhaps a combination of both. Their discussion touched on the social fractures that had long simmered beneath Flaxborough's genteel exterior, the divides between tradition and progress, piety and skepticism. Meanwhile, a minor but curious detail began to nag at Purbright's mind, a small folded note found tucked within the reliquary's empty display case. It bore an inscription in faded ink, a cryptic phrase, "The red veil hides more than blood." Purbright considered the phrase carefully. It was neither threatening nor overtly accusatory, yet it suggested secrets far deeper than a mere theft. He resolved to revisit the Abbey that evening, hoping the quiet cloisters might yield more clues. As twilight deepened, the Abbey's ancient stones absorbed the fading light, and Purbright's footsteps echoed softly along shadowed corridors. His patience was his greatest asset, an ability to listen, observe, and wait for the moment when concealed truths would emerge. In Flaxborough, nothing was as straightforward as it seemed, and Inspector Purbright understood that the true story of the nun who wore red was only just beginning to unfold. The Abbey at dusk was a place transformed. Shadows stretched long across the worn stone floors, and the flicker of candlelight cast wavering shapes against the ancient walls. Inspector Purbright moved quietly through the cloisters, his footsteps measured, the worn soles of his shoes barely making a sound. The atmosphere was thick with history, piety, and beneath it all, the faintest scent of unrest. He paused. Outside the refectory, where he had been told Sister Helena and several members of the order often gathered after evening prayers. The heavy oak door was ajar, a soft murmur of voices leaking through. Purbright hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The room was modest, yet dignified. Long wooden tables, benches polished by generations of use, and tapestries depicting scenes from the lives of saints hung on the walls. At the far end sat Sister Helena, her red habit unmistakable in the dim light, surrounded by two other sisters whose attire was more traditional. Alongside them was Father Ambrose, the Abbey's senior priest, a man of solemn demeanour and piercing gaze. "Inspector?" Father Ambrose greeted, inclining his head with measured respect. "We trust your investigation proceeds without undue disruption." Purbright inclined his own head politely. "Thank you, Father. I hope to maintain respect for your community while seeking the truth." Sister Helena spoke then, her voice calm but resolute. "There are questions among us, Inspector. The reliquary's disappearance has stirred old fears." Father Ambrose nodded gravely. "And suspicions that threaten to divide us." Purbright seated himself, his gaze thoughtful. "Such divisions are rarely born of a single act. Tell me about the Abbey's recent history. Any changes, tensions, or visitors who might bear consideration?" The sisters exchanged glances before Sister Helena began. "The Order has weathered many storms, but of late there has been unrest. Some of our number question the role of tradition in a changing world. Others fear that secrets buried long ago are coming to light." Father Ambrose added, "The arrival of the reliquary was meant to renew our faith, yet it has done the opposite." Purbright listened intently. "Who would stand to gain from its disappearance?" A long silence followed before Sister Helena replied, "Those who seek power through secrecy, those who fear transparency." Purbright made a mental note to follow this thread carefully. The conversation shifted to the practical details of the reliquary's disappearance. Miss Clark, the archivist, had been responsible for its safekeeping. Though Purbright had yet to meet her, her reputation for meticulous care was well known. "May I speak with Miss Clark tomorrow?" Purbright asked. Sister Helena nodded. "She will be at the library until midday." Before leaving the refectory, Purbright glanced at a tapestry depicting St. Agnes herself, a serene figure holding a lamb. The image seemed to watch over the room with timeless patience, a silent reminder of faith's endurance amid human frailty. The following morning found Purbright in the quiet aisles of the Flaxborough Library, where Miss Clark was seated amid piles of dusty tomes and delicate manuscripts. She looked up as he approached, her expression guarded yet courteous. "Inspector," she said, rising to greet him, "I understand you wish to discuss the reliquary." "Yes, Miss Clark. I appreciate your time." He settled into a nearby chair. "I am interested in your knowledge of the reliquary's history and any recent events surrounding it." Miss Clark adjusted her glasses. "The reliquary is ancient, likely dating from the 14th century. Its craftsmanship suggests it was a treasured vessel intended to house a fragment of St. Agnes's relics. We only recently rediscovered it during conservation work." Were there any unusual visitors or disturbances during that period? She considered this. There was a small group of scholars and a visiting clergyman who took great interest. They requested access to several restricted texts and the reliquary itself. Their questions were detailed, sometimes probing. Purbright's interest sharpened. Names. Dr. Ellery and Father Caldwell, she replied. They left a week before the reliquary vanished. The inspector noted the coincidence. Have you spoken with them since? Dr. Ellery was from out of town, and Father Caldwell returned to his parish elsewhere. Purbright made a note to investigate these individuals further. As he prepared to leave, Miss Clark hesitated. Inspector, I must mention there was a small incident the night before the reliquary disappeared. A young woman was seen near the Abbey grounds after curfew. Who was she? Sister Margaret, though she left the order several months ago under unclear circumstances. Purbright thanked her and left, the threads of his investigation weaving tighter. The nun who wore red, the missing reliquary, secretive visitors and a departing sister, all parts of a subtle puzzle. Later, as he strolled the cobbled streets, Purbright reflected on the human element beneath the stone and scripture. In Flaxborough, where every family had a history and every face a story, the line between sacred and secular was often a matter of whispered rivalry and unspoken grievances. The missing reliquary was less a simple theft than a symptom of the town's layered tensions, tradition challenging change, faith confronting doubt, and individuals navigating the narrow path between public virtue and private desire. And in this quiet turmoil, Inspector Purbright knew his task was not only to uncover what was lost, but to understand the motives that had sent ripples through the still waters of Flaxborough's daily life. The morning air was crisp as Inspector Purbright made his way to the modest cottage on Mill Lane, where Sister Margaret had taken up residence since her departure from the Abbey. The path was lined with hedgerows beginning to blush with autumn's first touch, and the steady rhythm of the town's awakening seemed undisturbed by the subtle undercurrents of the ongoing investigation. Purbright noted the neatness of the garden and the careful arrangement of pots on the windowsill, signs of a woman who valued order despite her unsettled past. He knocked gently, and after a moment the door opened to reveal Sister Margaret herself. Her attire no longer bore the striking red of her former order, but was nonetheless modest and composed, though her eyes hinted at an unsettled mind. "Inspector Purbright," she greeted with measured politeness, stepping aside to admit him. "I wasn't expecting a visit." "I hope I'm not intruding," Purbright replied, stepping inside. "I wish to speak with you regarding the reliquary and your departure from the Abbey." Margaret's expression tightened slightly. "I suppose the two are linked in the town's imagination, if not in reality." "Imagination can often blur with fact," Purbright observed gently. "If you would, please tell me about your reasons for leaving." She took a moment, then spoke quietly. "It was a matter of conscience. I questioned some of the practices within the order, particularly the secrecy surrounding certain rituals and artifacts. I feared the burden of silence was too great." "And the reliquary?" "I knew of it, of course. It was revered but also feared. I worried it would become a source of division." Purbright noted the careful balance in her words. "Did you have contact with anyone regarding it after you left?" She shook her head. I wanted to distance myself." "Yet you were seen near the Abbey grounds the night before the reliquary vanished," Purbright reminded gently. Margaret's eyes flickered, then steadied. "I needed closure. I walked the grounds in the moonlight, hoping to reconcile my past." Did you notice anything unusual? She hesitated. A figure, cloaked and silent. I couldn't see their face. They vanished before I could approach. Purbright considered this. Did you report this at the time? Number than Y feared no one would believe me. Thank you, Sister Margaret. Your honesty is appreciated. As Purbright left the cottage, he reflected on the complex emotions that bound the people of Flaxborough. The abbey's shadows stretched beyond stone walls into hearts and histories. His next visit was to Dr. Ellery's lodgings, a tidy room above a bookshop on High Street. The doctor greeted him with a courteous but guarded manner. Inspector, to what do I owe this pleasure? Dr. Ellery, I seek your cooperation regarding your recent visit to the Abbey. Of course. I came on scholarly business, nothing more. Purbright gently pressed. Were you aware of the reliquary's significance? Indeed, it was a remarkable find. And the disappearance? Ellery sighed. Distressing, but I was long gone by then. Purbright's questions revealed little, but he noted a slight defensiveness that hinted at deeper concerns. His final interview that day was with Father Caldwell, contacted by telegram and awaiting him at his parish a few miles away. Caldwell was a man of calm demeanour, though his eyes betrayed a fatigue that suggested burdens beyond clerical duties. I left Flaxborough to serve where I was needed, Caldwell said quietly. I had no part in any theft. Were you aware of tensions within the Abbey? There have always been tensions in any community of faith. Purbright listened, sensing that Caldwell's words masked more than they revealed. Returning to Flaxborough, Purbright pieced together the mosaic of motives and suspicions. The missing reliquary was a catalyst, revealing fractures within the Abbey and town, a conflict between preservation and progress, secrecy and openness. Later that evening, in the solitude of his study, Purbright examined the cryptic note found with the empty case. The red veil hides more than blood. Its meaning remained elusive, but he sensed it was a key to the tangled web of relationships and rivalries. As Flaxborough settled into night, its quiet streets belying the currents of intrigue, Inspector Purbright prepared for the next stage of his investigation, aware that beneath the town's genteel surface lay secrets as old and complex as the Abbey itself. The morning mist clung stubbornly to Flaxborough's narrow lanes as Inspector Purbright made his way toward the town's modest museum, a converted Georgian townhouse that had recently acquired a reputation for hosting exhibits of local history and occasionally local controversies. Today's visit was prompted by an invitation from Jonathan Wilkes, the town's historian and self-appointed guardian of Flaxborough's legacy, whose passion for the Abbey's lore had become a thread woven tightly into the fabric of Purbright's inquiries. Wilkes greeted the inspector at the door, his eyes alight with a mixture of enthusiasm and the slightest trace of guardedness. "Ah, Inspector, I'm glad you could come. The museum's archives might shed some light on the so-called red veil mentioned in that curious note you found." Purbright inclined his head with polite interest. "I confess the phrase puzzles me. The red veil hides more than blood. It suggests layers of meaning beneath the surface." Wilkes ushered him inside, the air heavy with the scent of aging paper and varnish. Rows of shelves and cabinets displayed relics of the town's past, faded photographs, brass buttons from wartime uniforms, delicate lace from forgotten gowns, and, at the heart of the collection, documents relating to the Abbey's long history. As Wilkes retrieved a worn leather-bound volume, he explained, "The red veil is not a common phrase in Flaxborough's records, but it does appear in a handful of medieval texts associated with the Abbey's secret rites. Some scholars interpret it as a metaphor for concealment, something cloaked, hidden beneath a facade of sanctity." Purbright's gaze lingered on the volume's fragile pages, ink faded but still legible. Any references to individuals or events that might relate to recent troubles? Wilkes frowned slightly. There are hints of factional disputes within the abbey dating back centuries. Rival groups vying for influence, often using symbolic gestures, veils, colours, tokens, to mark allegiance or betrayal. The conversation turned to the abbey's role in town politics, a subtle dance of power played out beneath the veneer of religious devotion. Wilkes, though a man of scholarship, was not without his biases, occasionally slipping into thinly veiled criticisms of the clergy. Purbright noted this but remained courteous. Such rivalries would hardly be surprising in any institution with such a lengthy history. Indeed, Wilkes agreed, and the discovery and disappearance of the reliquary has reignited these old tensions, though the methods have become more subtle than overt conflict. Their discussion was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Miss Clark entered, clutching a bundle of papers. "I thought you might find these relevant," she said, handing over transcripts of letters exchanged among Abbey officials over recent months, correspondence marked by increasing urgency and guarded language. Purbright scanned the letters, noting veiled references to the preservation of sanctity, the necessity of discretion, and the dangers posed by outsiders. The tone suggested a community grappling with change and perceived threats. Wilkes commented, "It seems the Abbey is as much a political entity as a spiritual one." "Such is often the case," Purbright replied, "especially in small towns where history and hierarchy intertwine." As the morning waned, Purbright's attention was drawn to a particular letter bearing an unusual seal, a red wax emblem depicting a stylized veil. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear, a warning against betrayal and a demand for loyalty. The inspector pondered the implications. This cryptic communication aligned unsettlingly with the note found at the reliquary's display. Were these warnings tied to the theft? Or did they signal a deeper conspiracy? Before departing, Purbright requested copies of the documents and thanked both Wilkes and Clark for their assistance. Outside, the museum's facade seemed to catch the light differently now, its walls bearing witness to the town's intertwined past and present. Walking back through the market square, Purbright reflected on the growing complexity of the case. The missing reliquary was but the visible tip of a submerged web of alliances, fears, and ambitions. The red veil motif seemed to be a symbolic thread linking centuries-old rituals to modern machinations. That afternoon, Purbright arranged to meet with Mrs. Withers, chairwoman of the local historical society, and a figure known for her sharp wit and equally sharp tongue. Her parlour, lined with stiff-backed chairs and china teacups, was a crucible of gossip and opinion. "Inspector," she began with a wry smile, "the Abbey's secrets are the town's secrets, and Flaxborough does love a good scandal, even if it's dressed in ecclesiastical robes." Purbright smiled faintly. "Yet beneath the amusement there is concern." "Of course," Mrs. Withers said briskly. "Who benefits from the unrest?" "Those who stand to lose control, I suspect." She spoke of rival families, church factions, and town councillors whose ambitions were subtly threatened by the Abbey's influence. The line between sacred duty and personal gain was often blurred. As dusk approached, Purbright returned to his office, his mind a mosaic of clues and conjecture. The symbol of the red veil was more than a phrase, it was a cipher for the town's concealed fractures, a key to understanding the true nature of the crime. And yet, the precise identities and motives remained obscured, waiting for the inspector's quiet patience and keen observation to unravel. Flaxborough's early autumn mornings had a particular crispness that seemed to sharpen the senses, and on this day Inspector Purbright felt the subtle weight of the town's undercurrents pressing gently but insistently against his calm demeanour. The investigation into the missing reliquary and the mysterious red veil was drawing more figures into its fold, each with their own grudges, secrets, and veiled intentions. His first appointment was with Mrs. Edna Withers, whose role as chairwoman of the Historical Society gave her a unique vantage point on the town's social webs. Her parlour was a modest, cluttered sanctuary filled with heavy floral upholstery and the faint aroma of bergamot tea, a place where gossip and opinion mingled as freely as the steam from her well-worn teacups. "Inspector," she greeted with a sharp eye and an equally sharp smile. "Flaxborough is hardly a town of wide horizons, yet the shadows it casts are long indeed." Purbright inclined his head politely. "Long shadows often reveal more than the daylight." She chuckled. "Quite so. The Abbey's reliquary is but the latest thread in a tapestry of old feuds and carefully tended resentments. You'd be wise to remember that even the quietest whisper can unravel a tapestry." Their conversation was punctuated by Mrs. Withers's insightful observations on the tangled relationships among town councillors, church officials, and families with legacies stretching back generations. She mentioned the rivalry between the Grayson and Lengthen families, subtle yet persistent, and how these rivalries often masked deeper, less obvious motives. "People wear masks, Inspector," she said, swirling the last of her tea. "Sometimes those masks are veils themselves." Purbright found himself reflecting on the phrase, recalling the cryptic note, "The red veil hides more than blood." The metaphor was becoming increasingly literal. Later that morning, Purbright arranged to meet with Miss Clark, the Abbey's archivist, at the library. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, casting rectangles of light over rows of leather-bound volumes and the gentle rustling of pages. Miss Clark was immersed in cataloguing documents when Purbright arrived. "Inspector," she said, setting down a thick manuscript, "I've been reviewing the correspondence you obtained. There's one letter in particular that warrants further examination." She passed him a transcript, its contents veiled in cautious language, but hinting at internal discord and warnings against external interference. The letter bore no signature, but was sealed with the same red wax emblem Purbright had seen earlier. "Do you believe this anonymous correspondent is the same person who left the note at the reliquaries display?" Purbright asked. Miss Clark nodded slowly. "It's highly likely. Whoever it is, they are both watchful and deeply invested in preserving certain secrets." Purbright's mind returned to the visitor Sister Helena, whose red habit had so starkly contrasted with the town's usual palette. Could the red be a symbol of allegiance to this secretive correspondent or faction? His musings were interrupted by the arrival of a letter delivered discreetly by a courier. The envelope was plain but bore the same red wax seal. Inside was a brief message: "Meet at the Rose and Crown at dusk. Answers await." Purbright weighed his options. The invitation was both a challenge and an opportunity, an opening into the shadowed heart of Flaxborough's mysteries. He resolved to attend, mindful of the town's penchant for appearances and the risks that lay in peeling back layers of decorum. As evening fell, the Rose and Crown, a venerable coaching inn with creaking beams and low, smoky lantern light, bustled with the usual mix of locals and travellers. Purbright settled at a corner table, his posture relaxed but alert. Minutes later, a figure approached, small, composed, cloaked in a muted cloak that nevertheless bore a faint trace of red embroidery. The visitor's voice was low, measured. "Inspector Purbright," she said, "I am Eliza Everard." The name was familiar. A quiet presence in town circles, known for her involvement in charitable works and her discreet knowledge of Flaxborough's social currents. I believe we share an interest in uncovering the truth about the reliquary, Eliza continued, but there are forces determined to keep certain things hidden. Purbright inclined his head. Your discretion is appreciated. What do you know? Eliza's gaze flickered with a mixture of caution and resolve. There is more at stake than the loss of an artifact. The Abbey's history is intertwined with family secrets, old loyalties, and debts unpaid. The red veil is a symbol of those entanglements. She paused before adding, I fear the situation may worsen before it improves. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a barkeeper bringing a round of drinks. Purbright and Eliza shared a look, unspoken acknowledgement that the game was shifting. Later, as the inn's patrons drifted toward their evening routines, Purbright stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over Flaxborough's rooftops and the abbey spires beyond. He pulled his coat tighter and thought of the veiled warnings, the secretive factions, and the complex web of personal histories. The crime was not merely the disappearance of an object, but a challenge to the town's equilibrium. As the night deepened, Purbright knew the path ahead demanded patience, subtlety, and the quiet persistence that had become his hallmark. The dawn broke over Flaxborough with a reluctant light, filtering through the mist and dappling the familiar facades of the market town in a soft, silvery glow. For most, it was simply another day of routine errands and polite greetings. For Inspector Purbright, however, it marked a fresh page in a slowly unfolding narrative. A narrative marked by whispered secrets, subtle allegiances, and the quiet but unmistakable tension beneath the town's genteel surface. The meeting with Eliza Everard the previous evening had left Purbright with much to consider. Her careful words, the faint but unmistakable thread of urgency in her voice, suggested the missing reliquary was but a symptom of something deeper, an interwoven tapestry of old loyalties, grudges, and unspoken debts, all cloaked beneath the respectable veneer of Flaxborough's social order. His first call that morning was to the Abbey itself. A place where tradition's weight was felt most keenly. The weathered stone and creeping ivy seemed to absorb the chill in the air, a silent witness to centuries of piety and politics. Inside, the quiet hush of the cloisters was punctuated only by the soft murmur of voices and the faint scent of incense. Purbright was granted a brief audience with Sister Helena, whose red habit had become a symbol of the mystery itself. She received him in a small, plainly furnished chamber overlooking the Abbey gardens, her expression composed yet touched with a weariness born of recent events. "Inspector," she began, "I trust your inquiries are progressing." "Progressing, yes," Purbright replied carefully. "But the deeper I delve, the more complex the tapestry becomes. May I ask about your arrival in Flaxborough? Your habit is unusual." She smiled faintly. "The Order of St. Agnes has several branches, each with its own customs. The red habit signifies a particular vow, one of vigilance and protection. It is symbolic, though often misunderstood." Purbright nodded. "And does your presence here relate solely to the reliquary?" "In part," she admitted, "but also to ensure that the Abbey's history and its secrets are preserved, however uncomfortable that may be." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Father Ambrose, his solemn countenance a contrast to Sister Helena's measured calm. "Inspector," he said, "there are growing concerns within the Order. Some fear that the reliquary's disappearance is a symptom of deeper unrest, disagreements that have simmered beneath the surface for years." Purbright regarded him thoughtfully. "And do you believe these divisions might manifest in acts such as theft?" Father Ambrose sighed. "It is not for me to speculate, but human nature is complex. Later, Purbright moved through the abbey's corridors, noting the subtle glances exchanged among the sisters and clergy. The undercurrent of tension was palpable, respectful on the surface, but charged with unspoken questions. His next visit was to the town council chambers, where he met Mr. Penfold, the solicitor, whose polished manner concealed a keen mind adept at navigating Flaxborough's delicate power structures. "Inspector," Penfold began smoothly, "the Abbey's affairs have long been intertwined with those of the town council. The missing reliquary has become a cause célèbre, but one must be cautious not to jump to conclusions." "Indeed," Purbright agreed. "Have there been any disputes recently that might relate?" Penfold hesitated. "Minor disagreements over land rights and parish funding, nothing overtly contentious, but beneath the surface, tensions always simmer." As the day wore on, Purbright compiled his observations, aware that the mystery was less about overt acts than about the subtleties of social interaction, the polite silences, the carefully measured words, the fleeting expressions. That evening, Purbright returned to the Rose and Crown for a second meeting with Eliza Everard. The inn's low beams and flickering candlelight seemed a fitting backdrop for conversation steeped in discretion. Eliza shared what she knew of the Abbey's history, ancient disputes over succession, secret societies within the order, and a long-standing rivalry that had fractured the community into factions symbolized by color and emblem, the red veil among them. The red veil, she explained, was once worn during a solemn rite meant to bind the faithful in secrecy and loyalty. Its symbolism has persisted, mutated into warnings and threats in recent correspondence. Purbright listened intently, weighing each word. "There is a figure," Eliza continued cautiously, "known only as the custodian. This individual claims to protect the Abbey's secrets at any cost." "Do you suspect who this might be?" Purbright asked. "Elusive," she replied. "But I believe they operate from within the Abbey itself, or very close to it." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden hush as a new patron entered the room. Purbright's eyes met those of a tall man with sharp features and an air of quiet authority. The newcomer's glance lingered briefly before he moved to the bar. Purbright made a mental note of the man's presence, sensing that the web was tightening. Walking home beneath a canopy of stars, Purbright reflected on the layers of the case. The missing reliquary was but the outward sign of deeper fractures, historical grudges, personal ambitions, and the relentless tension between secrecy and revelation. In Flaxborough, the dance of appearances and realities continued, and Purbright knew that his patient unravelling of threads would soon bring the hidden into the light. The soft glow of dawn painted Flaxborough's rooftops with a tentative warmth, but beneath the town's picturesque exterior, tensions hummed with a quiet insistence. Inspector Purbright began his day with a deliberate walk through the Abbey grounds, where the lingering scent of incense mingled faintly with damp earth and moss-covered stone. The cloisters, once a refuge of prayer and reflection, now seemed charged with a subtle electricity, a tension born not just of recent events, but of the slow accumulation of grudges and whispered fears. His footsteps carried him toward the Abbey's modest library, where Miss Clark had arranged to meet him. The light filtering through stained glass lent the room a kaleidoscope of colours, and the scent of old vellum was thick in the air. Miss Clark awaited him at a reading table, her expression guarded yet welcoming. "Inspector," she said, setting down a bundle of documents, "I've uncovered some correspondence that may shed light on recent tensions. It appears that factions within the Abbey have been in dispute over access to certain relics and manuscripts." Purbright leaned forward, eyes scanning the yellowed pages. The letters were careful in language, polite in tone, yet heavy with veiled accusations and threats, references to preserving the sanctity of the order, and warnings about outsiders meddling in affairs best left alone. "Do these factions identify themselves openly?" Purbright inquired. "Not directly," Miss Clark replied, "but there are hints, symbolism involving the red veil and coded references to custodianship." The inspector mused aloud. The red veil, a symbol of loyalty and secrecy, now a banner for internal conflict. Miss Clark nodded. "And the tensions are not merely doctrinal, they extend to the town's social fabric. Several prominent families have stakes in the Abbey's affairs." As they spoke, Purbright's mind returned to Eliza Everard's warning about the custodian, an elusive figure guarding secrets with zeal. The layers of tradition, secrecy, and power, struggles intertwined like the ivy on the Abbey walls. Later, Purbright visited the Rose and Crown once more, the inn's familiar warmth, a stark contrast to the cool detachment of the Abbey. Here, among townsfolk and travellers alike, the conversation was more candid, the gossip less veiled. At a corner table, he encountered Mr. Linton, a gentleman with a reputation for candour, and a family history entwined with the Abbey's past. Linton's eyes twinkled with a mixture of amusement and guarded candour. "Inspector?" he greeted. "Flaxborough's little mysteries always seem to come with more layers than the town's famous onion pies." Purbright smiled. "Indeed, I find the subtleties more revealing than the obvious." Linton leaned in conspiratorially. "There's talk that the red veil isn't just a symbol but a code, a marker for a faction within the Abbey who think themselves above the law of both God and man." Purbright's interest deepened. "Do you believe this faction could be involved in the reliquary's disappearance?" Linton shrugged. "In Flaxborough? Nothing would surprise me." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the bar. A figure, flushed and breathless, approached Purbright, a messenger bearing news from the Abbey. "The Abbey's servant, Thomas, has reported a disturbance in the east wing," the young man panted. There was a noise, like footsteps, late at night. He found signs of someone tampering with the storage rooms. Purbright's eyes narrowed. "Have you informed Sister Helena or Father Ambrose?" "Not yet, sir," the messenger admitted. "They ask that I bring the news directly to you." Purbright excused himself and swiftly made his way back to the Abbey under the pale light of morning. The east wing, seldom frequented except by staff, held storerooms and private archives. A faint chill hung in the air, and the faintest trace of footsteps, muddy and uneven, marred the stone floor. Examining the scene, Purbright noted a slightly ajar door leading to a small room where several crates had been disturbed. Nothing appeared stolen, but the disturbance suggested a search. "This is no random act," Purbright mused aloud. "Someone is looking for something specific." His inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Sister Helena, who regarded the scene with a measured calm that barely concealed concern. "Inspector," she said softly, "this confirms my fears that those who seek to control the Abbey's secrets will not hesitate to act in the shadows." Purbright nodded. "We must be vigilant. The red veil warns of hidden loyalties and veiled threats." As he left the Abbey, Purbright's mind was alive with questions. Who was behind this midnight intrusion? What was the object of their search, and how did it connect to the missing reliquary? Back in town, the morning bustle resumed, but beneath the surface a storm was gathering, a storm of secrets, loyalties, and the quiet determination of one man to unravel the truth without unsettling the fragile order that bound Flaxborough together. The market square bustled with the usual Monday morning rhythm. Shopkeepers arranging their fresh produce, the distant clatter of hooves on cobblestones, and the steady murmur of conversations that drifted like an undercurrent through the town. Yet for Inspector Purbright, the day, carried an unfamiliar tension, a tightening of threads that had long seemed loose but now hummed with a newfound urgency. His thoughts were still turning over the incident in the Abbey's east wing, the disturbed crates, the faint traces of unauthorized footsteps, and the lingering question of what exactly the intruder sought. It was clear that someone was determined to unearth a secret buried deeper than the missing reliquary itself. Purbright began his day by visiting the Abbey once more. The ancient stones, weathered by centuries of faith and secrecy, seemed to absorb the muted light as he passed beneath the arched entrance. Inside, Sister Helena awaited him in the small parlour, adjoining the cloisters, her expression grave but composed. "Inspector," she greeted, "there is unrest among the sisters. The midnight intrusion has unsettled the community." "Understandably so," Purbright replied. "Have there been any new developments?" She shook her head. "Only whispered fears and the growing sense that the Abbey's secrets are no longer safe." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young novice, cheeks flushed from the brisk morning air, entered bearing a small parcel. "Sister Helena," the novice said quietly, "this was left at the gate this morning. No name or message." Helena took the parcel carefully. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a red ribbon that seemed almost too deliberate. Inside, Purbright found a small, worn fabric, an embroidered patch depicting a red veil overlaid on a stylized fleur-de-lis. "It's a token," Helena murmured, "a warning or perhaps a call to those who understand." Purbright's mind raced. The symbol echoed the warnings and veiled threats that had haunted the investigation since its inception. This was no longer just a theft, it was a message. Leaving the Abbey, Purbright's next visit was to the home of Jonathan Wilkes, the town historian. Wilkes greeted him with an eager smile, but the shadow of concern flickered in his eyes. "Inspector, this token, it's known in certain circles," Wilkes explained, unfurling an ancient manuscript. "The red veil emblem signifies a secret society once active within the Abbey, a group sworn to protect certain relics at any cost. They operated in secrecy, their members unknown even to many within the order." Purbright studied the manuscript, its faded script telling of oaths, hidden chambers, and rituals designed to safeguard the Abbey's most precious secrets. "Do you believe this society still exists?" Purbright asked. Wilkes nodded slowly. "There are indications it does, though its purpose and membership remain murky. The disappearance of the reliquary may be linked to a resurgence of their activity." The inspector considered the implications. The missing reliquary was perhaps not a prize for theft, but a pawn in a larger game of power and preservation. Later, Purbright convened with Miss Clark, whose archival diligence continued to unearth fragments of truth buried in the Abbey's dusty records. "Inspector," she said, "there is a record of a ritual of the veil performed in secret chambers beneath the Abbey, an initiation for new members of this society." Purbright's interest piqued. "Is there any mention of the reliquary in connection with this ritual?" Miss Clark nodded. "Yes, it was said to be central to the ceremony, a symbol of faith and commitment. The pieces were assembling into a clearer picture, a secret society, protective of their charge, willing to wield secrecy and fear as weapons." That evening, Purbright returned to the Rose and Crown, the familiar inn, humming with subdued energy. He found Eliza Everard waiting, her gaze steady but troubled. "There's more at stake than we imagined," she said. "This society, the Vale, has deep roots here. Their members are not just within the Abbey, but woven through the town's very fabric." Purbright nodded. "Our investigation must proceed delicately. These are old wounds, easily inflamed." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a figure Purbright had noticed before, a man whose sharp features and quiet demeanour suggested both intellect and authority. He introduced himself as Mr. Hardwick, a solicitor with connections to the Abbey. "I've been reviewing the Abbey's legal affairs," Hardwick said. "There are documents indicating contested ownership and hidden covenants related to the reliquary." Purbright regarded him thoughtfully. "You believe the disappearance is tied to these disputes?" "Possibly," Hardwick replied. "But there are also rumours of personal vendettas and ancient grudges." As the night deepened, Purbright's mind churned with the complexity of motives and the interplay of tradition, power, and secrecy. Returning home beneath a canopy of stars, he understood that the threads of the case had become more tangled, each revelation pulling him deeper into Flaxborough's hidden histories. The missing reliquary was no mere theft, but a catalyst exposing the fragile balance of trust, loyalty, and rivalry that defined the town and its abbey. The morning fog that clung to Flaxborough's cobblestones seemed to diffuse the usual sharpness of the town's familiar outlines, wrapping buildings and figures alike in a muted haze. For Inspector Purbright, the day's beginning felt less like a fresh start and more like the slow tightening of a noose, a constriction born of secrets pressing ever closer to the surface. His office, usually a sanctuary of quiet order amid the town's bustle, was cluttered with documents, notes, and scraps of conversation. The layered histories of the Abbey, the secretive Red Veil Society, and the tangled personal allegiances had created a dense web of potential motives and suspects. Yet, amid this complexity, Purbright's steady eye searched for the single thread that would unravel the mystery. First on his agenda was a discreet meeting with Father Ambrose in the rectory's study, a modest room lined with worn books and the scent of old wood. The priest's grave demeanour was tempered by a quiet dignity as he greeted the inspector. "Inspector," Ambrose said, "these past weeks have been trying for us all. The Abbey's sanctity feels compromised." Purbright nodded. "It is clear the reliquary's disappearance is but a symptom. What of the recent disturbances? Any new insights?" Father Ambrose hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There are factions within the order, Inspector. Those who cling to tradition, and those who advocate for openness. The tensions run deep and are reflected not only in clerical circles, but throughout Flaxborough's social strata. Do you believe these factions could have conspired to remove the reliquary?" "Conspired, perhaps, but the motives remain murky. Fear, pride, and protection of secrets intertwine." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. A junior cleric entered, bearing a small parcel. Ambrose accepted it with a grave nod and set it on the desk. The parcel bore the now familiar red wax seal. Purbright opened it carefully. Inside lay a folded piece of parchment bearing a single line: "The veil will lift when the moon is full." A riddle, cryptic, yet laden with promise and threat. Later, Purbright sought out Mrs. Withers, whose sharp tongue and encyclopedic knowledge of Flaxborough's families often revealed truths others preferred hidden. In her sitting room, over cups of thick tea, she mused on the implications. "The moon, Inspector," she said, "has always been a symbol of change and revelation. The timing of this message suggests something imminent." "Do you think it is a warning or a challenge?" Purbright asked. "Both, likely. The players in this quiet game are poised for a move." Heeding Mrs. Withers's advice, Purbright arranged for discreet surveillance of the Abbey grounds and key figures connected to the secret society. The town's rhythms continued outwardly unchanged, but beneath the surface the tension was palpable. That evening, as the full moon rose over Flaxborough, casting pale light across the Abbey's ancient stones, Purbright made his way to the site of the original theft. The quiet cloisters, bathed in silver, held shadows that seemed to flicker with whispered secrets. He was not alone. A figure emerged from the darkness, a slender woman in a cloak embroidered faintly with red, her eyes reflecting the moonlight with a mixture of defiance and apprehension. "Inspector," she said softly, "you seek the truth behind the veil." Purbright inclined his head. "I seek the truth that restores peace." She hesitated, then produced a small, ornate box, the missing reliquary. "It was taken to protect it from those who would misuse it," she explained. "The Society's divisions have grown dangerous." "Who are you?" Purbright asked. "A guardian of the old ways," she replied, "and a witness to the fractures that threaten to undo us all." Their exchange was interrupted by footsteps, several figures emerging from the shadows, faces familiar and resolute. A quiet confrontation unfolded, voices low but firm, revealing alliances and fractures within the abbey and town. Purbright listened, piecing together the truths veiled beneath layers of loyalty and fear. The reliquary's theft was a desperate act, not of greed, but of preservation and warning. By dawn, the situation had stabilized, the relic restored, and tentative agreements reached among the factions. As the town stirred awake, its familiar bustle resumed, but a subtle shift had occurred. The unspoken understandings and guarded peace would hold, for now. Purbright returned to his office, settling into the routine paperwork that awaited him. The case was far from simple, but patience and quiet observation had brought resolution. He glanced once more at the moonlit reliquary, now safely back in its rightful place, and allowed himself a small, knowing smile. The morning sun rose over Flaxborough with a gentle clarity, casting soft light through the lace curtains of Inspector Purbright's modest office. The lingering chill of dawn still clung to the air, yet there was a palpable sense of calm settling over the town, a calm that felt both tentative and well-earned. After weeks of subtle manoeuvring, quiet observation, and careful questioning, the strands of the mystery had drawn taut and were now poised for resolution. Purbright sat behind his desk, the familiar clutter of papers and case files before him. He allowed himself a moment to review the notes and reflections that had accumulated. The disappearance of the reliquary, the elusive Red Veil Society, the cryptic warnings and the whispered tensions within the abbey and town, all had converged into a web of human complexity beneath the surface of Flaxborough's genteel facade. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Entering was Sergeant Maureen Blythe, her expression one of respectful deference tinged with curiosity. "Inspector, the key people have gathered in the Abbey's chapter house, as you requested." Purbright rose with the quiet grace befitting his station. "Thank you, Sergeant. It is time we drew together the threads." The chapter house was a solemn chamber, its ancient oak benches and stone walls imbued with centuries of solemn assembly. Around the semicircle sat the figures central to the investigation. Sister Helena in her distinctive red habit, Father Ambrose, Eliza Everard, Jonathan Wilkes, Mr. Penfold, and even Mr. Hardwick, whose sharp eyes held a trace of unease. Purbright began with a measured tone. "We are gathered not to assign blame, but to seek understanding. The reliquary's disappearance was more than theft. It was a symptom of divisions long held in silence." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The Red Veil Society, once a secret protector of certain traditions, has fractured. The act of removal was intended to prevent misuse and to warn of threats from within and without." Eyes shifted among the group, the layers of allegiance and history slowly revealing themselves. "To Sister Helena and Father Ambrose," Purbright continued, Your roles in the abbey are clear, but the tensions within your order have been exacerbated by fear and distrust. Sister Helena inclined her head. It is true, Inspector. Our commitment to the abbey's sanctity sometimes blinds us to the changing world. Father Ambrose added, and yet it is the weight of tradition that anchors us. Purbright turned to Eliza Everard. You have been a discreet yet vital ally. What insight can you offer into the town's involvement? Eliza's voice was steady. Flaxborough's families have histories entwined with the abbey's secrets. Old rivalries and loyalties persist, colouring our interactions and complicating trust. Mr. Penfold interjected smoothly. The legal disputes and contested covenants are but one facet. The personal is inseparable from the institutional here. Jonathan Wilkes nodded. History is never idle. It breathes in the present. Purbright then addressed the gathered assembly with a subtle but firm candour. The reliquary was hidden not to steal, but to protect. Its concealment was a desperate act by those fearing corruption from within factions. He looked toward Mr. Hardwicke, whose legal acumen had illuminated many murky corners. The covenants you uncovered speak to a desire to control, to preserve power. Hardwicke's expression softened. Indeed, but such desires can divide as much as they protect. Purbright concluded, the Red Veil Society's protective intentions became obscured by fear and secrecy. It is a reminder that even the noblest motives can fracture when communication fails. A quiet murmur ran through the chamber, a shared recognition of fragile truths. Outside, the town resumed its usual rhythm, unaware of the delicate reconciliations being forged within the abbey's walls. Later, Purbright returned to his office, the weight of resolution settling comfortably on his shoulders. The case was closed not with dramatic confrontation, but through the gentle unraveling of human nature's complexities, the interplay of tradition, loyalty, and the perennial struggle between secrecy and openness. He allowed himself a brief smile, the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in his otherwise composed demeanour. Flaxborough would return to its routines, its quiet facades and understated rivalries, intact, yet subtly altered by the truths now laid bare. And in the quiet corner of his office, the reliquary, safe once more, seemed to catch the afternoon light, its significance both preserved and transformed.